an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Vorkosigan Saga. Well, book 4-ish, but the second in the Miles Vorkosigan series, The Warrior's Apprentice. You guys, this is so confusing. Miles Vorkosigan book 2? Then what's the first book? Did I skip it? Was it written later? What's happening? Chapters 13 through 15. In these chapters, something goes very, very, very wrong. So wrong. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Jen for commissioning this episode. Thank you, Jen, if you're out there. But yeah, guys, I keep meaning to bring up that it says it's the second Miles Vorkosigan book. All I can think is that maybe she wrote a prequel, and so this is considered the second book because of that. But it feels like it falls very naturally after the book that I read. It doesn't feel like we skipped anything. So yeah, just a little bit confused on that one, but it's not a big deal. I just keep meaning to ask. So guys, I'm going to wait to get there. I'm not going to actually jump to it. But my God, this was very unexpected. Am I the only one that was surprised? Wow. Okay. Chapter 13 starts with Miles getting led around, as he puts it, his new domain. And the whole thing with Bothari in these chapters up until the end is him feeling this incredible pressure to watch over everything and everybody, both on Miles's behalf and Elena's. It says a combined sick bay had been set up in the refiner's infirmary as the largest facility. All medical personnel were drafted from the new prisoners to treat their own wounded, requiring yet a couple more of Miles' thinly spread troops as guards. They, in turn, were sucked in by the needs of the moment as assistant corpsmen. Miles watched Tung's efficient surgeon and staff at work and let this pass, limiting himself to a quiet reminder to the guards of their primary duty. Miles was unnerved by the catatonic Colonel Benar and the other two Felician military officers who lay listlessly, barely responding to their rescue. And he sees that there are just like these very small wounds and is genuinely a little bit freaked out at how small the evidence left behind can be of something that fucks a person up so completely. There is a person named Ellie Quinn who I guess had her face burnt off somehow. And both Miles and Elena are trying to stay in the room and watch the placement of this. It's called plastiskin because they have regenerative technology, but it's not here. So they have to do something temporarily to protect her. And for some reason, both of them feel like obligated to be here because they were responsible for her when this happened. And it is so horrifying. Skin, nose, ears, lips, gone. Subcutaneous fat boiled away. Eyes glazed white and burst. Scalp burned off. She tried to speak, a clotted mumble. Miles reminded himself that her pain nerves had been blocked. He turned his back abruptly, hand sneaking to his lips, and swallowed hard. Oh my God. Oh, you guys. Oh my God. That is horrifying. He is the one that really is like, okay, can we please go out into the hall? And Elena at first is like, well, I feel like I should stay. And then she looks at him and sees his face and she's like, okay, all right, let's go out. And he manages to keep himself from throwing up, but it really is a close thing. And this results in a conversation that is so frustrating. You guys, last time I said, Miles, it feels like you just keep misjudging what to say to Elena, and I just stand by that. This dude, he is a good kid. You know, like, there is no reason for him to be putting his foot in his mouth the way that he keeps doing. But it's like he cares about her so much that it's almost like he sort of subsumes the feelings that he has for Elena into statements about women in general. And because he isn't making that clear, because he understandably, like, he doesn't want her to know that it's very much about her and how it could have been her just now, you know, this horrible injury. It's coming across as him just being really sexist. And I'm not even saying that he's not sexist, because I'm sure to a degree it's impossible to grow up on Barrier and not kind of have that built into your system a little bit. Like, it's like the United States, you know, we can know better, and we can begin to realize that that is what has happened to us and that we've been sort of brainwashed. But it's something that you have to constantly fight against. And I just really felt frustrated with him here, because your boy, why are you saying that women shouldn't be in combat to a woman that you respect, who is quite capable, that you know wants to be in combat, and takes exception to the fact that she is being held back from everything? Why would you say this to her face? And rightfully, she asks, well, why is what happened to her any worse than what would happen to a man? And he says, I don't know. It just is, basically. Your father once said that if a woman puts on a uniform, she's asking for it, and you should never hesitate to fire. But all my instincts are to throw my cloak across her puddle or something, not blow her head off. It throws me off. The honor goes with the risk, argued Elena. Deny the risk, and you deny the honor. I always thought you were the one Barriaran male I knew who'd allow that a woman might have an honor that wasn't parked between her legs. Miles floundered. A soldier's honor is to do his patriotic duty, sure, or hers, all right. But all this isn't serving the Emperor. We're here for Tav Calhoun's 10% profit margin. Or anyway, we were. And I get what he's saying, but that's not what he originally said. You know, like, I feel like he's sort of trying to back this up a little bit here and act as if, well, what I actually meant was to this specific situation. No. You said women shouldn't be allowed in combat, period. That's not, this situation is not an exception. You're saying this as across the board. And I was very disappointed in him for this. I really was. I felt like the fact that he tripped up so badly and that he has done it with her so continuously, either he has to start telling her that it's about his concern for her specifically and cloak it in, like, not that I am in love with you, although he clearly is, but just that you are somebody who means a lot to me. Or you have got to start keeping your comments about women to yourself a little bit more until you have vetted them and begun to sort of sift through why you leap to make the statements that you do, you know? So anyway, this was just one of those things, you guys, where I felt like I was watching him and wanting to reach out and grab his mouth and shut him up. And it's not as bad as it could have been. You know, it's not like, I'm not trying to say that he has completely ruined any opportunities between the two of them. I don't know how much she even sees him that way, though. I don't feel like there's anything really there. It's just that I can't help but wonder what his mother would think if she heard him say this. Like, he brings her up shortly, and it felt strange to me that he points out to Elena, he's bringing his mother up because Elena says that she is going to watch the plastiskin be applied because she's trying to harden herself so that she no longer feels the pain of the people around her. And it, you know, and he brings up his mother to say, like, my mother never actually stopped feeling others' pain. That didn't ever happen for her. I don't really think that's how it works. Well, sir, if you respect your mother and you know that she earned the right to be in the field the way that she was, how can you, like, use her as an example here and say, like, how honorable she was, but then turn around and tell Elena, you shouldn't be allowed out there, though? I really just need him to get a hold of himself, is what it comes down to. SM in the chat says, hi, this is definitely the first Miles book chronologically. You didn't skip one. Okay, cool. Thank you very much for that. Because, yeah, it's weird. So they have this officers meeting, and Miles growled and sat with his back to the entire installation. He quickly slid into the role of referee, controlling the flow of ideas while concealing his own dearth of hard factual information. He folded his arms and said and but only very occasionally, God help us, because it caused Elena to choke. I would help a great deal, Major Dom, if you could reach your command. Miles wound up the session thinking, how can you have misplaced an entire country, for God's sake? As a last resort, perhaps a volunteer in one of those station shuttles could sneak down on the planet and tell them we're here. We'll keep trying, sir, Dom promised. So then we get this scene with Miles in what is supposed to be like a luxurious room. Except there has been a few different like people staying here, and they have each left all of this detritus, clothing and bottles and shoes and food wrappings and stuff. And so it's just kind of a disaster. And then there's a mention that the bathroom has like fuzzy patches on the walls. And it sets, he set the lights to maximum UV when he was done and sealed the door, reminding himself sternly that he had not demanded the sergeant's nocturnal company on the grounds that there were things in his closet since he was 4. You guys, this is like a question that has sort of been on my mind a little bit, but this in particular, for some reason, really made me stop and ask. So the mention of setting the bathroom to UV, because UV kills bacteria, right? Like, this is a common method of cleaning various things, especially electronics recently, as we have, had the pandemic, and phones are known to have like more germs on them than a toilet seat. But I do feel like using UV as a cleansing agent is something that is sort of more new, and it's thrown out here in a way as to be like, well, of course everybody would know why it's being done. But was it common knowledge when this was written? And does this author have a background in science? Because there's a lot of things that I've been sort of taking for granted as, well, yeah, this is something that we all know from media and, giant like media TM. When I say this, I mean just like in general, sci-fi, TV, movies, books. And then I had to sort of take a step back and be like, actually, media of this type wasn't as like produced as often. And is it possible that she has all of this knowledge from her own personal background and things? Because there's just a lot of knowledge that she drops here and there that feels really specialized to me. And it could just be that she researches the fuck out of things, or it could be that she has a friend who's in science that she goes to and is just like, okay, how would you do this? Like, give me a real quick. But I just really like had a moment of remembering UV as feeling like a really wild new thing, even though it wasn't really. And that was like 15, 20 years ago. Not quite that recent, but you know what I'm saying. Jen says common knowledge back then, but not as well known as today. Okay. So bed was a null G bubble, warmed womb-like by infrared. Null G sex, Miles had heard, was one of the high points of space travel. He'd never had a chance to try it personally. 10 minutes of attempting to relax in the bubble convinced him he never would either, although when heated, the smells and stains that permeated the chamber suggested that a minimum of 3 people had tried it there before him recently. You guys, this is so horrifying. And personally, I don't know about y'all, but I absolutely cannot sleep in a warm room. It really blows. And you know, I have to have blankets on me. Even in the summer, we crank the AC and we just pile blankets on still. Owen got a weighted blanket recently, and I've been sort of like jealous of it and considering one for myself, because I'm like, maybe that would be a way to achieve this cozy feeling without needing an actual comforter in July. But the idea of going into a little room that's womb-like in its warmth, that's what? Like at least body temperature? 98 degrees? Is that what we're doing? That's insane. That's not comfy. No. Ew. And then the smell. Oh God. Duh. SM says Bujold's father was a famous engineer, so maybe some family science osmosis there. Okay, that might make sense. So he has to like leave the little chamber. I'm also like the idea of null G sex as being something that's really exciting. I'm trying to like consider why that might be. And you know, you are working against gravity with certain sexual positions. So maybe it's just like you can get into any position you want, because it's not, you know, like, for example, I'm too heavy for Owen to like pick up and hold. You know, that is not going to happen. But in zero grav, that's something that's possible. And I guess it would be sort of like being underwater, that kind of sensation, except like obviously not as uncomfortable, because sex in water doesn't go super well most of the time. So I guess I can see the appeal there. This is when he gets interrupted by a yell, and it's Elena. And he goes running into the room, and he finds Baz Jessic, and he is being strangled by Bothari. And Elena, she has like her tunic like partially undone, and is trying to stop her father, but doesn't want to actually like get into it with him, which I understand. And Miles at first is thinking like, did this guy fucking try to rape her? Like, is that what's going on? But then he realizes Elena can take care of herself, and then just gets jealous and has a moment of like, maybe I should just let him kill him. Miles. Jesus, dude. But she yells out to him, and he goes over, and Bothari ignores him. And then he actually lays a hand on him. He had the sick feeling it was the most dangerous thing he had done in his life. He dropped his voice to a whisper. Must I give my orders twice, Armsman? Bothari ignored him. So then Miles is like, fine, I'm going to break your grip. And Bothari says, you don't have the strength. And he's like, no, but I have the strength to break my own fingers trying to do it. And as he proceeds to try, Bothari finally stops and lets go of the guy. This dude, Bothari says, caught her nuzzling that coward. He's not a coward, Elena yelled. He's as good a soldier as you. He saved my life today. And she describes the situation in which Miles remembers the person Baz shot was actually already dead because Miles had killed him with his own med kit inside his suit. So actually, Baz had saved her life, or Miles had saved her life. But she isn't aware of the kind of like hacking that they were able to do, I think. And so she is giving the credit for this to Baz. And that is yet another thing that is rankling really badly for Miles, is this sense of like, but it was me that saved your life and he's getting credit. Now, the thing is, maybe it's true that Baz didn't actually save her life, but he did not know that person was harmless inside that suit. You know, so this is the thing here is that it's the intent, really. And he jumped in there and did his thing. And whether or not that guy was already taken care of is sort of irrelevant. I can understand, even if Miles explained to her, it might not change the way that she sees him. And Bothari is just saying to himself, like, it's not proper, it's not right. I have to make it right. It has to be perfect. This is fascinating. And this is something that comes up a little later in conversation, where Bothari is asking Miles, if you were to, like, have to take over for me if I were killed, would you do your duty and ensure a good marriage for her and make sure to get like a proper go-between and the whole thing? And it's obviously something that is so on his mind. And I kept sort of thinking about this. It's almost like he is trying to use his daughter as a way to make up for the way he has treated women a lot of his life, and especially her mother. Like, if maybe I am able to make things right with her, that it will undo some of the horrors that I have inflicted on women in my past. Do you know what I'm saying? And I'm not even certain if he really is thinking of it that way, but a part of me thinks he is. Like, it's a literal score that he is keeping for himself. And I understand wanting to do that. I understand feeling this way. And yet it's making her life so miserable in such a way because he has a very narrowed, blinkered view of what is good for her and appropriate for her. And so this, like, there's always these stories, you know, about people vicariously trying to live through their children. And it's interesting to see this, like, attempt to live through your child, but not in the way that we normally think of that. Usually when you describe vicariously living through your child, it's trying to make your child live the dream that you never got to live and that you feel was somehow denied you. And with Bothari, it's like he's just trying to live through her, like, her life will make up for the life that he himself lived, you know? And that's just such a losing battle to me. That feels like, how do you ever know it's okay? When are you satisfied? Would he be satisfied with her, like, situation if he did find her a husband that he thought was suitable? Would he be done? Really? Or would that just be another, like, the first step in a process that actually doesn't really have an end? You know, would it be something that okay, now you have to get pregnant and have children, and, you know, every step of her life, he is sort of like monitoring in a way. But anyway, this whole thing, it's just so sad because she is so disconnected from her father, and he would never tell her the truth about any of this. So she doesn't know why he is the way he is. And not that knowing necessarily helps that much to your situation, but having that would at least give you some compassion. And I also kind of wish if like anybody knew that they could explain to him that she isn't a tool to make his own life right. She has a life of her own, and trying to control her the way that he constantly is, it's just a different kind of abuse. And I'm not really saying that he's abusing her, but I am saying that, like, what he has in his past is a violation of women over and over again. And he is pushing it here in a way that feels like you are teetering on the edge of that with her in a different way. It's still about control, and you're just perpetrating it in a whole different scheme than you originally did, but it's sort of got the same impetus behind it in a way. But anyway, this is when they have the chat between the two of them, and Bothari says that, like, Baz isn't right for her. He's a deserter. And then she must have everything right and proper. You see that, don't you, my lord? Of course. But please don't murder my engineer. I need him. Damn Tex, always coddled. That cracked me up. How dare you coddle them by keeping me from murdering them? My lord. So eventually, Miles gives his word that if something happens to Bothari, I'm to be buried at your lady mother's feet at Vorkosigan-sur-Low. Your father promised, didn't he tell you? His word as Vorkosigan, your word. You planning on heaven, Sergeant? As my lady's dog, blood washes away sin. She swore it to me. He trailed off, gaze never leaving the depths. My lord, the intensity of all of this. I really love how later Miles is like, didn't I just know that I didn't need to ask questions? And that is a real feeling I know so well. And it's the sort of thing that I would always be very careful about asking both my parents about their past, because I knew that they had both gone through so much abuse that any given subject could potentially hit on something that I didn't want to bring up. And I knew, depending on who I was speaking with, that they would tell me. My father would just sort of shut down. My mother would tell me with the intent of openness between the two of us. But unfortunately, it would just flip me out and make me even more loath to talk to her about certain things, because I didn't want to make her relive that by telling me about it. So yeah, this sort of dancing around things that he sort of thinks about later, I really relate to it. All right. So what we've got going on here is this really difficult balance, because they don't have enough staff for, dealing with the ship, and they're having to spread people really thin. And when it comes to like third shifts without a break, people are making mistakes because they're exhausted. And so they have to figure out a different way of doing things. So he gets a bottle of wine and a plastic table and some folding stools. And he heads off to speak to Tongue. And I love this. He walks in. They surprised Captain Tongue hanging by one hand from the overhead light fixture and working, as yet vainly, on levering its cover apart with a flattened snap torn from his uniform jacket. "Good afternoon, Captain," Miles addressed the dangling ankles with sunny good cheer. Tongue scowled down upon him, estimation in his eyes, measured Bothari, found the sum of the calculation not in his favor, and dropped to the floor with a grunt. "What were you going to do with it if you got it apart?" Miles asked in curiosity, looking up. I do really, really enjoy because in fiction, so often what we do is our good guys, our protagonists, they get thrown into a jail and they are instantly trying to find a way out to escape using whatever tools they have in this way. But then if we capture bad guys and we throw them into some kind of prison, they're just there. And them escaping is almost never due to them just managing to wiggle a way out. It's always like some kind of betrayal, you know? So I really enjoy that we're getting the sort of protagonist action, but from, I don't want to say the enemy exactly because Tongue really isn't, but from our antagonists at least. It just mixes it up a lot more and makes it more interesting, especially like in light of the fact that Miles already has dealt with people trying to escape in the previous chapters as well and keeps walking in on this. It's just sort of keeping up this running theme that I find genuinely very, very entertaining. It is not getting old to me. So this conversation with Tongue is so great because he is absolutely Barry-Aaron in his soul. This man is in the wrong place with the wrong people. There was a place for him that would have just delighted in what his personal code of conduct is. So Miles tries to set him at ease by drinking the wine first. And Tongue is like, "Oh, come now. You take the antidote before you give me the wine and you build up a tolerance or whatever." And Miles is like, "Well, I mean, I could have, but," and then he just keeps eating and lets it go. And finally, Tongue asks, "How are my troops?" Miles promptly detailed a list by full name of the dead and of the wounded and their current medical status. "The rest are under lock and key as you are. Excuse me from mapping their exact locations for you, just in case you can do more with that light than I think you can. Sorry things got so messy. I realize how it must burn you to have your opponent blunder to victory. I'd have preferred something neater and more tactical myself, like Komar, but I had to take the situation as I found it." And Tongue says, "Who wouldn't? Who do you think you are, Lord Vorkosigan?" And Miles is in the middle of sipping his wine and just basically like inhales some of it by accident and has to like choke for a minute. You guys, this feeling of something going down the wrong tube. Why is our body built like this? That we can even drink something down the wrong tube. It feels very foolish to have set us up like this. And it takes ages to like feel back to normal after this happens. But he thinks for a moment, like, does he know who I am? And it very quickly is apparent he doesn't, but he deeply admires Count Vorkosigan and has read the Komar report. I've read it 11 times. Most succinct military memoir I've ever seen. The most complex strategy laid out as logically as a wiring diagram. The man's mind must operate in 5 dimensions. And yet I find most people haven't heard of it. And he's very impressed, not only that Miles has read it and, like that he has some interest, but eventually, Miles sort of lets it slip that he has met him, and this man is so excited. Like, he just straight up fanboys for a second. And Miles realizes this guy is like just kind of a history buff and gets very sort of, ooh, God, I already was sort of interested in what I could do with him, but this is making it a lot more interesting now. And he proceeded to pump this unexpected spring of reminiscence for all it was worth. Pieces of fruit became planets and satellites. Variously shaped protein bits became cruisers, couriers, smart bombs, and troop carriers. Defeated ships were eaten. The second bottle of wine introduced other well-known mercenary battles. Miles frankly hung on Tung's words, self-consciousness forgotten. I love this so much. So this ends with Miles being like, it really seems like a shame to waste you in this prison. And he's like, I'm not staying here. And Miles says, okay, maybe not, but there is room for you at the top here. And Tung says, a mercenary who can't honor his contract when it's rough as well as when it's smooth is a thug, not a soldier. Miles fairly swooned with unrequited love. I cannot fault you for that, sir. This is so delightful. So basically the estimation that Tung makes of Miles of just being like a little man who's very out of his depth and has lucked into things. Miles is like, oh, that's very, very close to the truth. I don't like this. I've got to throw him off somehow. And he says that he has a contract of his own, but is, real vague about it. When he, like later on, when the two of them have another moment, it's clear this really meant something to the guy, even though he didn't want it to in the moment. It really feels like sort of despite himself, he wound up getting charmed, and I enjoy that a great deal, especially when it's not like that charming was done on purpose. If you get what I'm saying, like the charm was part of a real, genuine interest and admiration on Miles' part. He didn't come in here thinking to himself, how do I handle a man like this? I'm going to pretend to care about the thing that interests him. They actually had a real meeting of the minds, and that's super fun to me. So, chapter 14. Long story short, there is another attack, and everything goes so according to plan that Miles is almost like, I honestly can't believe this. It's like I'm controlling the enemy. This is insane. Let's see. He dashed through the flex tube into the Triumph. The waiting soldier clanged the lock shut behind him and hastily blew off the tube seals. As he'd guessed, he was the last aboard. He made his way to the tactics room as the ship maneuvered free of the refinery. Glad you made it, my lord. Just Mr. Naismith, not my lord. Austin looked puzzled. The others will call you that. Yes, but it's not just a courtesy. It denotes a specific legal relationship. You wouldn't call me my husband, even if you heard my wife do so. I thought that was a pretty great comparison. And Mayhew is talking about this like different piloting system and really does not like it. He says that it feels like it's piloting me. I don't think they quite realize how much ordnance Dom brought. They're just repeating the same tactics the Felician officers reported they used the last time. The lead Pelian ships were just coming into range. Miles held his breath as though it could force his people to hold their fire. And again, they spread all of these bombs out, and the ships coming behind began to peel and swerve. Austin shared his enthusiasm. Look at them, right down the gullet, just like you claimed they would. Miles's thrill was mitigated by the sober reflection of what names he'd have earned by guessing wrong. And if that isn't the truth, every time you're right about a thing, you got to remember it was probably an accident. So then a ship fires something, and they're not even sure what it is. And Miles says, you know what, let's try and catch one. The communications officer achieved a fully scrambled channel to the aerial, and the new objective was transmitted. Austin, growing enthused, chortled at the chance to try his new ship's limits. The ghost imager, confusing the enemy's aim with multiple targets, proved particularly useful. What's the script? Stop or we blast you? I don't think that would work. And let's see. It's close. Austin glanced over his shoulder at the miniature fireworks. Friggin' suicidal. I want all our engineering people suited up and ready to board. They know they can't outrun us. My guess is they'll rig some go to hell with a time delay, all pile into their lifeboat shuttle and try to blow up the ship in our faces. But if we don't waste time on the shuttle and are quick enough getting to the back door as they go out the side, we might disarm and take whatever that was intact. And Austin is like, all my engineers? What if we aren't fast enough? And Miles says, improvise. So, what we get is a really intricate, set of chain reactive bombs that they have to... I love the way that this is written. A tear-streaked voice hissed over the comm link. Oh, shit. Oh, shit. Where are you, Kat? Armory. There's too many. I can't get them all. Oh, shit. Keep working. We're on our way. Every dandelion bomb in here is set to go off, she cried, sparing one glance at him. Her voice shook, but her hands never stopped patting out the reset codes. Miles, lips parted in concentration, watched over her shoulder and then began to repeat her movements on the next row. The great disadvantage to crying in fear in a spacesuit, Miles discovered, was that you could not wipe either your face or your nose, although the sonic cleaners on the inside of the faceplate saved that valuable informative surface from a sneeze. Another tech joined them. Miles and he did not spare attention for social chit-chat. They worked together in silence broken only by the uneven rhythm of hyperventilation. On to the next, and the next, and the... There was no next. Finished. Kat rose and pointed to one bomb in the array. 3 seconds. 3 seconds! And she burst into unabashed tears and fell on Miles. He patted her shoulder clumsily. There. Cry all you want. You've earned it. He killed his comlink broadcast momentarily and inhaled a powerful sniff. That was great. I really love this. By the skin of their teeth. My God, he is getting an armada. It's no surprise to start calling him Admiral. What are you supposed to do? So, when he goes and talks to Elena, he says, we found that ship whose shot penetrated your shielding. Did it hit anything? What did it do? And she says, it punched a hole. Well, not a hole. Right through the prison section. It was losing air. And she let them all out. And it turns out that Elena did this to save a bunch of other people. So it's they're making it sound like she was just incompetent and released a bunch of prisoners, but it was a calculated risk that there was no good choice, so they're still trying to round people up because they're all over the place. And my father was guarding the prison section alone during the attack. He tried to stop me from letting them out. I shot him with my stunner. I'm afraid he's going to be rather angry. Woo! She stunned Bothari. My God. I mean, it was the right thing to do. The guts to do that. I don't know that I would have been able to do it. Good for her. Amazing. So, pass on this order at once. Prisoners are to be recaptured alive with as little injury as possible. And Lieutenant Gamet, whose hearing was evidently keener than Miles had supposed, glanced back over his shoulder. Major Dom's killed, sir. He and a tech were switching weapons posts, and their flitter was hit by a high-speed debris. Nothing left. Didn't they tell you? I'm the ranking officer here now. It's really giving I'm the captain now. And Dom being dead, there's something really sad about it because Dom was so... I just really felt for him for some reason. And I think it's just because of the uncertainty that he seemed to display when we were first setting up this whole deal. I just kind of appreciated the clear, like, amateur quality of this guy. And I was wanting him to get to see the end of what was done and everything delivered safely. Like, it just feels unfair that after everything, he doesn't make it at least that far. So, yeah, that's a bummer. And it was like, it hit me a little worse than I would have expected. So eventually they recapture everybody. And when the final head count was made, Tung and 7 of his men, including his other pilot officer, turned up missing. So did a station shuttle. And Miles is like, oh, fuck. Oh, well, I guess, what's done is done. Lieutenant Gamad, swollen with his newly inherited seniority, was inclined to challenge Miles' authority over the refinery technically. After Dom's cool, get-the-job-done intensity, Miles suffered him ungladly. I really love that. Gamad was quashed, however, when he overheard one of Miles' mercenaries address him as Admiral Naismith. Miles was so delighted with the effect of the ersatz title on Gamad that he let it pass unchecked. Unfortunately, it spread. He found himself unable to retrieve the careful neutrality of Mr. Naismith thereafter. Life does come at you fast, Miles. You gotta watch out for that. Oh, God. So, there are these crates on float pallets that show up. And Miles is like, ooh, these almost look like pirate chests full of treasure. And he's delivering, and these guys are like, well, we need to have his manifest and personal papers. And they're talking to Miles. One of them calls him a galactic mutant. And Miles has to like get him into line a little bit. And Miles has this like interaction with them over the money because they're acting here like they've got some kind of leverage over him. Because Miles had a verbal agreement with Major Dom, and they don't want to honor that. Which that comes back to bite Miles a little later when he like really says a couple times that a verbal agreement is even more binding. So he says, if the cargo is right, you'll be paid. The paymaster nodded to his assistant, who uncoded the locks. Miles held his breath in happy anticipation of more money than he'd seen in one pile in his life. So the money is this weird, like, dual color, and it isn't, like, familiar to him at all. And he says, what is it? And one of them says, well, it's paper currency. And he's like, I fucking know that. What currency is it? And they tell him it's millipfennigs. And he's like, okay, but what is that worth in actual money? And as he continues to pursue this, it becomes very clear that this isn't worth anything, and they didn't expect him to ask questions about it. They were dropped entirely from the exchange, so it's just worthless. Oh my God. Losing the high orbitals was just a setback. We still control our own airspace. I want Baton dollars. There are no Baton dollars. Every cent of it, yes, and every flake of other galactic currencies we could round up was sent with Major Dom to buy that cargo, which I have risked my life delivering to you, which he died delivering to us. I have to go. I have to initial the inventory. Yes, go. The paymaster and his assistant fled, leaving him alone in the beautiful conference chamber with 2 crates of money. That the paymaster didn't even bother to set a guard, demand receipt, or see it counted merely confirmed its worthlessness. You guys, this is such a bummer. I totally get that we need to keep Miles in this situation. So he can't get paid. He can't be given a means to get out of this and go home. But I was expecting him to want to stay in it. I wasn't thinking that he was going to be basically screwed into it, you know? So this, he just sits there staring at this worthless money, trying to decide what he should do. And somebody comes in and sees this pile and thinks that it's really worth something. And when Miles gives him the guard for it and says, like, you've earned my trust, this man acts like he has been granted such a boon. It's like a huge compliment to him. And it's just like an amazing bit of, I don't know if Miles realizes what this is likely doing for his reputation, that he is trusting somebody else with the money, even though he knows it's worthless. This guy doesn't. And that, like, there's just probably he's building for himself a little bit of a reputation for being open-handed and good with his people, and it's a complete accident. And Miles buried his face in a pile of millifenigs and giggled helplessly, very close to tears. He saw them bundled back up and trundled safely to cold storage, then lingered in the conference chamber. So, Jessic and Mayhew found him still gazing pensively across the installation. We set them straight. About what? The Felicians and that greasy career builder Gamed. About time someone did that, Miles agreed absently. Here they come now. The Felicians were back. The captain, the paymaster, and what looked like most of the ship's officers, plus some kind of space marine commander Miles hadn't seen before. This time the captain came to attention and saluted. I believe I owe you an apology, Admiral Naismith. I did not fully understand the situation here. Baz, what have you been telling these people? Just the truth, Baz began. How do you do, Admiral Naismith? I am General Halify. I have orders from my high command to hold this installation by whatever means necessary. Since our ship was lost to the Pelions on our way here, mine is the unenviable task of doing so with 200 men, half my complement. I did it with 40, Miles observed automatically. Mine is also the task of stripping it of bait and ordnance to send back with Captain Celine to prosecute the war on what has unfortunately become the home front. What it comes down to is that this dude wants to hire the Dendari mercenaries. And at first Miles is just about to be like, go fuck yourself. And then he's like, wait, how would you pay us? And he's like, I'm authorized to make terms with you. And Miles is like, Major Dom didn't have authority to hire outside forces, so why do you? And the general says, they said by whatever means necessary. I'd want a contract in writing, signed by somebody who can properly be shaken down, held responsible. We must be paid in Baton dollars. I understood you were fresh out. If the blockade is broken, we can get off-planet currencies again. You'll get them. Miles pressed his lips together firmly. He must not break down into howls of laughter. Yet here he sat, a man with an imaginary battle fleet, negotiating for its services with a man with an imaginary budget. Well, the price was certainly right. Oh, you guys, this made me fucking cackle. I loved that so much. So Miles, he gets told, like, you have to give us your word. We understand that really means something to you. And Miles gives it with the understanding that he will definitely be breaking it. And it will be the first time he's ever done it. But that is what he is assuming he shall do. And I think he will inadvertently keep it. So we shall see. So, the next scene, Elena is asking him, like, how serious he is about the blockade busting deal. And he's like, I really don't know. Like, it kind of all depends on what comes together. And he says, we're going to at least have to break through. At least it gives me something to do while I wait. This machine is more fun than chess or Strato any day. Look, I'll teach you how to operate it, show you a game or two. You'll be good. And it turns out that her and Captain Kudelka used to do this. And I really enjoyed this little moment, the two of them, like, playing this game. This was just the sort of thing he would have been taught how to do at the Imperial Service Academy, he thought, with an inward sigh. There was probably a book on it. He wished he had a copy. He was getting mortally tired of having to reinvent the wheel every 15 minutes. Although it was just barely possible, there was no way for 3 small warships and a battered freighter to take out an entire mercenary fleet. I like the idea that maybe because he doesn't have the book, because he doesn't have a guide, that he's able to come up with things more interesting due to the fact that he isn't encumbered by the baggage of, like, previous people. Because that can happen sometimes, not always. I feel like we give so much credence to that as a phenomenon that we act as if not having any experience is good, actually. And I don't believe that. But sometimes it can happen. So at this point, Captain Austin calls in and says, I'm coming down. Tongue's back. It's strange. He's standing just out of range in what looks like a Pelion Inner System passenger ship, saying he wants to talk with you. And Tongue gets on and says, hey, how about that job you offered me? And Miles is like, wait, hold on. Because Tongue's like, I can give you all my guys. And Miles is like, oh, yeah, really? You can have all your guys come onto my ship and then probably, like, overpower me and take it from me? Yeah, that sounds amazing. How do you prove that you're not going to do that? And Tongue says, only as you proved that memorable lunch was not drugged in the eating. Which was a very good answer, actually. You also realize I cannot give you your ship back. Yes, I understand that. You'll have to work with both Austin and Thorne without bringing up, past frictions. Tongue looked less than enthusiastic, but he replied, if I have to, I can even do that. My payroll for the moment is entirely in Felician millifinigs. Do you, know about millifinigs? No, but at a guess from the Felician strategic situation, I'd suppose they'd make an eye-catching toilet paper. And there is a point here where he says that he wants to kiss Elena's hand for letting them out. And Miles gets very snappy and is like, that's Commander Bothari, and you can fucking salute her, and that is all. And Tongue gets a look, and I think he sees that Miles is, like, in love with her, that it was just a complete dead giveaway. And I don't know if it's good or not that he, like, showed his hand that dramatically right then. I feel like he maybe fucked up. So what we find out is that the deal was supposed to be with Oser, that if Tongue lost his ship, that he would give Tongue another command. But he says basically he chewed me out in front of everybody and humiliated me, and then did not want to give me another ship. And Miles is laughing to himself because he's like, I get being mad that he got defeated, but this guy is very good. And so what you could have done was leverage the fact that Tongue would be angry at being beaten and would come at us extra hard. But instead, you've alienated him and made him switch sides, which is such a complete fuck up. And it's just a really nice reminder of what can go wrong if you command in a direction that is based on fear and humiliation. And Miles, I have to assume, is remembering this and is going to be sure not to handle shit in this way. So eventually, there is a little bit of talk about somebody who is like a double agent, basically. And when Miles is like, is that frequent? The response from Tongue is like, they're all over the place. Have you never come into contact with any? And it's almost a giveaway at how little experience Miles really has. And he says, Captain Tongue, I accept your service. Admiral Naismith. It is Admiral Naismith now, I understand. Miles grimaced. So it would appear. I see. I shall be pleased to serve you, son. And I really love that throughout this scene, they're both trying to drink out of these bulbs where you squirt the drink in the air, and because there's no gravity, it just floats in a blob and you just drink out of the air. Wild. What? That sounds very unfortunate. Miles tries to do the same thing and it just gets all over him and he has to go and change. It's a metaphor. So this is when we have the thing, and I'm behind my time, but I got to do this justice. So it turns out that Baz has even more initiative than we thought. And he basically recruited new people for the Dendari and just went through and found all of these folks that were trapped by the blockade and wanted to get the fuck out of there. And he checked to see whether they could use a fucking like plasma art cartridge properly. And that was it. And then he brought them on. And Miles is like, well, I guess that's valid, you know? And he said, when he asked, like, where were they going? Mayhew says, well, they weren't exactly trapped. It seems some local Felician magnate of this sub-economy had hired them for bodyguards a few years ago. About 6 months back, they botched the job, rendering themselves unemployed. They'll do about anything for a ride out of here. I found them myself. So Bothari is like, Seda Gandans? Really? The engineer turned his hands palm outwards. They're trained. Do they realize that some Dendari are Bariaran? Excuse me. They know I am, and with a name like Dendari, any Seda Gandan would have to make the connection. All right, well, set them up with training schedules and quarters with Captain Tongue. And this is the first time that Thorne has heard Captain Tongue is with them and is just sort of like, oh boy, this is going to be amazing because Oser has to be freaking out. So Miles is looking through the people and he comes across the woman who had stared at him in the docking bay. And when he looks into it, this is Elena's mother. He is able to figure this out quite quickly based on the dates and her looks, and it's all coming together so quickly, and he is thinking, oh my God, I'm going to show Elena her mother and be a hero because she has just thought this woman was dead and gone, and here she is. And I am here squirming, you guys, as I'm reading this, like freaking out a little bit. I hope you don't, please don't, because my God. And then it goes even worse than that. So I just like this whole thing is so... He's in the room with Elena and Bothari talking about how he has to get into physical training again even though he really does not want to, but he admits that it has to be. And then a door slides open, and this lady, Elena, steps in, and she has a needler. And she looks at Bothari and is like, it is you. I wasn't sure, but it is. And as soon as Bothari realizes who she is, he drops his weapon. This man is entirely accepting of the fact that he should die. It's not even like, he doesn't even try to defend himself. And he actually says to her that you are still beautiful. Which, why would you do that, dude? Why? Oh my God. Like, it's like, it must be so confusing for him too, because he had all of these like memories that were sort of bundled together, where he had been saying that they were married and trying to pretend this whole thing. But it seemed like he actually believed that for a little while, and then he began to realize that wasn't true. So I'm wondering if when he sees her, does he have a moment of like thinking for a moment, oh, it's my wife, you know what I mean? I don't know how deeply he began to really believe those things before he was able to come out of it all. And she is saying to Miles, like, do you know who you fucking hired? And he's an ex-Barryaran soldier. He was Admiral Varutcher's chief torturer. The Admiral never raped his victims himself. He preferred to watch. Varutcher was Prince Serg's. Perhaps the prince was jealous. He applied more inventive tortures himself. The prince was waiting, since his particular obsession was pregnant women, which I suppose Varutcher's group was obliged to supply. Miles' mind screamed through 100 unwanted connections. So I didn't know the thing about pregnant women and that was being purposely done, but that adds a whole other horrifying aspect to this thing that I personally didn't need to be there. And Jesus fucking Christ. Like, the fact that she's being impregnated for the gratification of somebody else. And what does that gratification look like? Is it making her miscarry? Like, what is this? Ugh, all of it is horrifying. Like, the implications. I don't even want to think anymore about it. So there was such a thing as latent knowledge. How long had he known not to ask questions he didn't want to hear the answers to? And he's looking at Elena, who isn't believing it. You can see on her face that she's outraged at these accusations. And she's saying, I was 18 when I fell into their hands. And that one was their tool, their best showmaker, their pet. The Barryarans refused to turn over their war criminals, and my own government bargained away the justice that should have been mine for the sake of peace settlements, and so he went free to be my nightmare for the past 2 decades. And Miles turns to look at Bothari and just be like, is this, he's not actually saying, he just says sergeant. And this is when he says, lady, you are still beautiful. The Escobaran woman's face contorted with rage and fear. She braced herself. A stream, as of tiny silver raindrops, sang from the shaking weapon. The needles burst against the wall all around Bothari in a whining shower of spinning razor-sharp shards. The weapon jammed. The woman swore and scrabbled at it. Bothari, leaning against the wall, murmured, rest now. Miles was not sure to whom. So Bothari falls over, and he's got small, amounts of blood all over him. And then suddenly, all of this blood pours out of his mouth. And the way this is described, Bothari lay still, watchful eyes stopped and open, head twisted, the blood flung from his mouth soaking into the friction matting. He looked like some dead animal, smashed by a vehicle. "Why didn't he fire?" wailed Elena. "Wasn't it charged?" Elena took one despairing look at her father's body and snaked a hand around the Escobaran woman's throat, catching her tunic. Her arm tightened across the woman's windpipe. And Miles stops and yells, "I think she's your mother." And then, initially Elena's starting to deny it, but then she kind of looks at her and begins to realize. "You look like him." Her great brown eyes held a thin crust of distaste over a bog of horror. I'd heard the Bariarans had used the fetuses for military research. Elena released her and stood back. Once, at the summer place at Vorkosigan-sur-Lot, Miles had witnessed a horse trapped in a shed burned to death, no one able to get near it for the heat. He had thought no sound could be more heart-piercing than its death screams. Elena's silence was. She was not crying now. "My lord, do you want these aside? God almighty!" And it's Mayhew who has just walked in. And he says, "I'll get the medics, hang on." And he takes off. And Elena is coming at Bothari, the mother. It's getting confusing here. Elena Visconti. And she says this wasn't a murder. This was the execution of a war criminal. It was just. And she keeps saying it, but it feels like now that it's done, she's not entirely sure. So Miles says it wasn't murder, it was suicide. He could have shot you where you stood any time. And he says, "I don't mock you, but until I was 4, almost 5, I couldn't walk, only crawl. I spent a lot of time looking at people's knees, but if there was ever a parade or something to see, I had the best view of anybody because I watched it from on top of the sergeant's shoulder." For an answer, she spat on Bothari's body. A spasm of rage darkened Miles' vision. He was saved from a possibly disastrous action by the return of Mayhew and the medtech. I am not blaming Miss Visconti for spitting on him. This man raped her repeatedly over the course of God knows how long. However, spitting on him after hearing what he meant to somebody else, when you have already succeeded in murdering him, just chill for a second. Just for a second. You know what I'm saying? Like, I get it, but also, can you just have any compassion for what this kid just said? He did not know what this man was to you. Just for a moment, for God's sake, you know? So Miles says that it was an accident. And Ms. Visconti is like smiling in triumph and relief. She thinks I've endorsed her justice, Miles realized. And the medtech looks at Bothari and says, "What a mess." And Miles realizes the way that she says this is indicative of, like, this guy isn't dead. There's something to be done. And asks about triage for the cryo chambers and whether or not there's room. How would you rate this injury? Worse than any I've got on ice now, except 2. Who are the 2? A couple of Captain Tongue's people. Do you want me to dump one? Miles paused, searching Elena's face. She was staring at Bothari's body as if he were some stranger wearing her father's face who had suddenly unmasked. Her dark eyes were like deep caverns, like graves, one for Bothari, one for himself. He hated the cold, he muttered at last. Just get a morgue pack. That was really interesting. They're possibly was a way to save him, and Miles chooses not to take it. I think that was the right call. I don't think Bothari would have been happy to be resuscitated. After all that he has done, I feel that he sacrificed because he knew he deserved a punishment that he never really got. And I don't think taking that away from him would be the right thing to do. So Elena finally turns to this woman and says, "Mother." And that woman says, "You keep away from me, far away." She gave her a look of loathing, contemptuous as a slap, and stalked out. So Artie leads her off to bed. Miles, it says her face reminded Miles of a bombed out city. Miles waited for the medtech in death watch for his first liegeman, afraid and growing more so, unaccustomed. He had always had the sergeant to be afraid for him. He touched Bothari's face. The shaved chin was rough under his fingertips. "What do I do now, Sergeant?" You guys, this is brutal. I am glad, in a way, that his past caught up with him this way. I know that Bothari had been trying to make things right, but there are some things you just can't make right. It's not possible to do. And it's not up to the perpetrator to determine whether that has been achieved anyway. So this woman who has this trauma that there has never really been closure for, it seems like she stumbled upon him, not like she heard he was here and she found her way in. It really seems like it was a coincidence they wound up here together. I can't help but feel like it's fate, if that exists in this book. And I almost wonder if it's not better for Elena to find this out about her father after he's gone. Because I don't know how you continue to interact with a person as a father when you find out they have done something like this. It's like, I genuinely can't see her ever wanting to be in contact with him again. And that would break Bothari's heart so profoundly. And it just, I feel like it's the only way that this could have gone. And I don't want the victim to feel pressured to be a mother to a child that she was forced to have. However, I just feel so much for Elena because she has no parents now. And this woman that she had been imagining her whole life is here and hates her and sees her as a byproduct of a rape and nothing more. This is a girl who shares blood with her attacker. I mean, this is just such a horrifying scenario overall. So, and it's sort of like, it's just a really compelling plot device to have somebody that we know has really done horrific things. And we didn't necessarily see them, but Bothari was painted so thoroughly that we saw all of these instances that pointed to what he had been and still was in some ways, and even like the last book when they are trying to sneak into the city to get the replicator and they come across, I can't remember her name, but the woman who is pregnant. And the soldiers are talking about raping her. And he's getting turned on by it. This woman who is in distress. And that was very much still part of who he was. And I feel like that's a big element as to why he constantly felt the need to atone, because he knew it wasn't gone. This isn't something like you could say, oh, that's not who I am. I acted completely out of character. No, he knew that is who he is. And he just has to find a way to like rein it in and attempt to be better for some reason. And Cordelia was the reason. And then eventually Elena was the reason. And I just feel like maybe this was justice. I liked Bothari in his way, but he was kind of a disaster in a lot of ways, you know? And the way that he killed that pilot was so cold, and he enjoyed it. It's complicated, you know? That's always the way it is. Anybody who's like, every person is more than one thing. And it's very difficult when someone has experienced a particular person as one thing and it's completely the antithesis of what you yourself have experienced that person to be, because you want to say they are wrong. Like that's something that can happen. Like you can just determinedly say objectively, you are wrong about this person. When it's so, all of like what we determine about someone's character is so subjective. And there are going to be times where your experience of somebody is simply either an anomaly or they were just that way with you specifically and nobody else. That happens. And it's something that can be really hard, I think, for people who are close to somebody who did wrong, like profound wrong, that if it gets out what that person did, but you still love them, you have to hear everybody talk about them as if they weren't a person, as if they were just a monster. And maybe they were, but not to you. And how do you reconcile that? And how do you grieve when nobody wants to hear it? You know, when that's like only your experience and maybe like two other people's. I really feel for Miles. I really feel for Elena. Like, I don't know what to think. And this was just so unexpected. I never saw this coming. So I'm over time so bad. You guys, I think we really do need to cut back on the number of chapters on some of these. But well, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I'm really interested in where this is going. So I'll see you guys very soon. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.